Reverend Steele and Commissioner Curtis Richardson. I'm sorry.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, I am Henry Marion Steele. I am the second-born son and child of Reverend Dr. and Mrs. C.K. Steele, Sr. I can remember back to the first days of the bus boycott, at which time I was quite young. And then later, I remember the student movement during the lunch counter demonstrations and activities. And I will have more to share about it as we go along.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Curtis Richardson. I'm currently City Commissioner and Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Tallahassee. I've been a Tallahassee resident for about 45 years now. Came to Tallahassee to attend Florida State University, where I obtained degrees in psychology and have a degree from the University of West Florida in Pensacola. I started my professional career as a school psychologist in the Gadsden School District and have held several positions in state government and now am the Community Relations Coordinator for Lively Technical College, which is right next door. And it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Dr. Parker for the work that he has put into making this happen. As you all know, the bus boycott was a seminal event in the history of the city of Tallahassee, and we are even today, I believe it is, as a city, offering free rides on Star Metro, which is our public transportation system, to anyone who wants to ride in commemoration of the history of the bus boycott here in Tallahassee. It really began the move to change Tallahassee. Tallahassee was a very segregated, of course, as many towns and cities were during that time, very segregated, and African Americans lived primarily in a handful of neighborhoods here in the city. And so the bus boycott began the movement to change Tallahassee, I hope for the better. We're working every day to make Tallahassee an all-America city, which we've been twice designated for all of its citizens, regardless of where they live. Do we have challenges? We've got lots of them. But the one thing that we do here in Tallahassee is work together as a community to face those challenges. And we're looking forward to our city moving forward and being a progressive city where all can come and feel at home, and there will be opportunities, educational opportunities, professional opportunities. We encourage those who want to visit, and we're very fortunate to have been named one of the South's greatest cities to visit by by Southern Living Magazine, and so we're proud of that designation as well. But we do have lots of work to do, and if we aren't careful, we will see ourselves slipping back into some of those bad old days that there were those who gave their lives for us to be able to move on from. So looking forward to the discussion this morning and where we go from here.
Let me express my appreciation to Dr. Parker for his continued support and sponsorship of these events each and every year. And I hope we are reminded that we are not just celebrating the bus boycott, but all of the subsequent activities for civil rights in Tallahassee since that time. I go back a long ways. I was not born in Tallahassee. Our family moved to Tallahassee in 1952, at which time I was 8 years old, and my family consisted of my parents and 4 children, 3 boys, 1 girl, C.K. Steele Jr., whom you may have seen in the film a little earlier, sitting at the lunch counter. I think I pointed out it was he when he first appeared in the film. I was second son, then Clifford, who was also in the film, the third, and my sister at that time, who was born in Augusta, Georgia, made the 4th child. She was the baby for 10 years until Darryl, the 5th child and 4th son, was born. And in 1961, Derek, the youngest, was born the same year that I finished high school and was entering college at Morehouse in Atlanta. I graduated Morehouse in 1965 and went from there to Colgate Rochester Divinity School in Rochester, New York. I completed my studies there in 1968. And following graduation, my first appointment was with Dr. Ralph David Abernathy at West Hunter Street Baptist Church in Atlanta. Dr. Abernathy knew that I would be graduating, being a close associate and friend of the family and my dad's for a number of years, wired me and asked if I would come to assist him at West Hunter Street Church in Atlanta, which I did. So I would say I was a very early participant in the civil rights struggle, not only here, but other places as well. In fact, my first year in college, I don't think I was there 3 months before being arrested during the lunch counter sit-ins there, where we had a mass demonstrations of students from all of the black colleges in Atlanta, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, ITC, Morris Brown. So civil rights is more or less in my blood. I remember the very first day of the bus boycott in 1956, as was mentioned in the film. My brother and I, my younger brother, Clifford, and I were on our way home from school, and on this particular day, we decided to take the bus home, which most of the time we walked or someone picked us up. At that time, the bus, that was the black bus that ran from Fairview to Frenchtown, Fairview, Bond, back through Fairview, Frenchtown, which also daily passed by our home at Boulevard and Tennessee Streets. When the bus left Bond Community, came back through Fairview, and we were coming along Boulevard right there at the set, and students were in an uproar on both sides of the streets, yelling, "Get off that bus, get off that bus." And immediately we knew what had happened, that a boycott had been initiated here in Tallahassee, led by the students of Florida A&M. So as soon as the bus turned down Palmer and we got to Adams, off we came and walked the rest of the way home. So I very vividly remember that, which was very exciting to me because, excuse me, I thought I had taken care of this, but it wants to be a part of everything as well. And I believe on that very same night, the first mass meeting had been called by the Tallahassee Ministerial Alliance at Bethel Baptist Church. On the previous night, the ministers and other leaders had met at Bethel AME Church, which then was downtown at Duval and I think Duval and Virginia Streets, where Bethel Family Life Center, Bethel Baptist Life Center and Middle School is situated now. That first meeting was so inspiring. It was so exciting to me, not only to me, but apparently the whole city, because it seemed the whole city was out. Bethel Baptist seated that time, well, you could get about 800 people in the old Bethel Baptist Church. It was packed to its capacity, and people were outside and all around the church. Few churches, if any, had air conditioning at that time. The windows were open, so people were outside listening as well. Cars were everywhere, and police were outside patrolling and taking down tag numbers to intimidate people, because so many of the folk in Tallahassee were working for the county, the state, or the city. But everything was in high gear. Everybody seemed to be in accord, anxiously anticipating what was going to come and celebrating what had already transpired. And me personally, as a youngster, I was thrilled to see it. I was really, really proud of African Americans in Tallahassee and elsewhere at that time. We had come to Tallahassee from Montgomery. So when the boycott broke out in Montgomery, December 5th of 1955, we felt the connection there and welcomed the boycott in Tallahassee. We had connections. My grandmother and grandfather still lived in Montgomery, and other relatives. It was my mother's birthplace. And the first three of us children were born in Montgomery. So we had strong roots and ties to Montgomery. After the boycott in Montgomery, we couldn't wait to get to Montgomery. We went every year, part of the summer, to my grandmother's who still lived in Montgomery. She was an insurance agent and traveled all around Montgomery and close areas such as Prattville and Wetumpka, right around Montgomery. So we were glad to follow her, and she always fussed about her car being worn out during the boycott, because being on the road all day, every day, going places, she hauled a lot of people during the bus boycott. She said they slammed her doors and tore up inside of the car and so on. But that's what people endured. Though Montgomery had purchased the Montgomery Improvement Association, which was the inner city council of Tallahassee, had purchased a number of station wagons, and churches had as well, to carry people to and fro during the boycott. So, having already experienced mass meetings here in Tallahassee, we went with her to mass meetings in Montgomery, which were simply awesome. They were awesome here as well. But it was so thrilling because Martin Luther King had been thrust into the leadership, and to experience those activities And Tallahassee's mass meetings seem to follow the same pattern, where the ministers were the leaders of the effort. Just to say a little about that, there were certain leaders, when we were waiting for the leaders to come in, there were others there, and some were asked when there was a lull or they were waiting for a king and others to come in, would get up and do pep talks. It was a big rally, those mass meetings were. And they would start out with the persons in attendance opening up the meeting themselves, because they would arrive hours before time for the meeting in order to get a seat. And some of those old sisters and brothers would start out with like old-time, old-fashioned revival meetings. They would start singing and clapping and praying and testifying. It was something that would, I think, inspire and motivate a lot of people into action. Tallahassee was some different from Montgomery. Tallahassee was smaller, but its efforts were just as strong, just as bold, just as dangerous, threatening, what have you. My father was elected president at the very first meeting of the Inner City Council. He had been named the person to preside over the first meeting the night before at Bethel A&E. And when he was elected, I remember distinctly seeing him putting his face in his hands and bowing his head, and I'm sure he must have said a prayer. He accepted the nomination and the election. And that's placed us, our family, right at the forefront and most vulnerable to attacks, threats, all things of that nature. I remember somebody saying something, I believe in the film, about, they said they were going to kill me, or they would call and say that. We got those calls all the time. And how my mother stood under all of those pressures, especially after my older brother and I became involved in the sit-ins. But there were threats. At one time, my father was speaking in Perry, and word got out, and it came from a person who was working in a white couple's home, who overheard them discussing the possibility of assassinating my dad while he was over in Paris, something of that nature, as I recall. And I remember Reverend Dan Speed, who was a businessman and a minister, got some others together and went over to Perry to bring my father back to Tallahassee. But there were phone calls, numerous phone calls, so many that we could not even answer, and all through the night, until eventually they would put the phone down in the telephone seat and with pillows over it in order to sleep at night. It didn't matter who at the house answered the phone. The threats, the nasty comments and remarks continued in a way. My dad was very interesting with that. One person would call, they would call and say nothing many times, just hear breathing. And my dad decided to talk to the caller, and he would just talk. It was a monologue, just talking about love and nonviolence and the movement what have you. And during the course of the conversation on this occasion, he was called to dinner, and he told the caller that he was sorry that he had to hang up the phone and go to dinner. But if you call back in 20 minutes, we can resume this conversation. I think it was 20 or 30. Anyway, the caller called back, and my dad resumed his monologue. And I heard him say that one individual that he talked to seemed to come around to express understanding and sentiments in regards to the movement. But Tallahassee was as tense could be. Much smaller than now. I think about 27 to 28,000 people in Tallahassee. But Tallahassee was thrown into the limelight and was in the news all over the country. And we had news people from everywhere coming to our house and calling and coming to the meetings. At the mass meetings, there would be so many cameras with their lights, all the national broadcasts, people, and people from different walks of life and for different reasons came to Tallahassee, and the first place they were going to come to was our home. But my mother remained steadfast. She entertained people, she fed people. We had later on during the student sit-ins, people from CORE, and thank God for CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. The organization Patricia and Priscilla Stevens were a part of, and we credit them for bringing CORE to Tallahassee. And what a movement was begun at that time. You never saw any two young people, college freshman age, as involved, as courageous, as persistent as these two young ladies were. And they became very close to our family. And as John, Attorney Dew mentioned a few minutes ago, Patricia eventually boarded with us and became like family in our home. So I know some of the things that Pat and Priscilla went through trying to go to college and lead the movement. I don't know what they did, how they did anything in school, because their hearts were in the movement. Totally. They were totally consumed with a passion beyond measure at that time. I can go on and on talking about what it was like at the house, but it was like open door. People were coming and going all the time. Our lives were full of the movement. And that is my background when it comes to civil rights in Tallahassee. And as I said, it has followed me all my life. I haven't always been as active because though I was arrested in Atlanta, Dr. King, bunch of menaces, bail came and got us out. On and on I could go with that. But I am so grateful of our place and stance in the movement. As I was back then, I still am, and am appalled when I am reminded of those activities. And as I watched the film a while ago, it was just so touching, and it's so astounding to me to see how so many of those people are gone. They're either dead or somewhere else. But it was important to the nation. All eyes were on Tallahassee. And I feel that, in a sense, Tallahassee has not been recognized as much as it should have been or should be through the years. But I think time and activities such as these keep the movement and activities alive in the hearts of people across the area and the nation. It was momentous, it was important to me, and thrilling as well. I was so thrilled until going to jail at 16. It didn't faze me one bit. I was very happy, not really realizing at the time how serious the matter was. I didn't take care of that, apparently. Okay, Curtis, you might have something else.
Yeah, right.
There are lots of others.
Any questions? I certainly don't have that kind of background to share. But I grew up in a small town just south of Jacksonville called Green Cove Springs. I grew up in the segregated South. We attended segregated schools until I was in middle school. Of course, when Brown versus Board of Education was passed, and schools in the South and all over the country were forced to integrate. And so my first experience with attending school with white students was, again, when I was in middle school in my hometown. We weren't allowed to, I remember those experiences vividly. Of course, we lived in an all African-American neighborhood, but it was like family. I'd come from a large family of 8. My dad was military, and my mother was largely responsible for raising 7 boys and a girl during those times. And I remember those experiences vividly when we went to the movie theater, and we sat in the balcony of the theater, and the whites sat downstairs. That movie theater still exists in my hometown, as a matter of fact. And we couldn't go to the city-owned swimming pool. If we had to be out of downtown by a certain time of evening. There was a railroad track that separated the black community and the white community in my hometown. And if you weren't across those railroad tracks, if you were African-American and back into the black community, by a certain time, we had a whistle that blew. That whistle blew at 7 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then 6 o'clock in the evening. It had something to do with the workday. And if we weren't back across those railroad tracks by 6 o'clock, by the time that whistle stopped blowing, then we had rocks thrown at us from the railroad tracks. I remember those days very vividly. And so that's my history with, and certainly I was not involved personally in the civil rights movement, but witnessed that through television and stories that we were told growing up about Dr. King and others, because there were many others. Dr. King is often referred to, and rightly so, but there were many in communities throughout this nation that went through the same kinds of experiences that the Steele family went through in order for us to make progress in this country, and for young people at the time like me to be able to have the opportunities that I've had in life, to have the opportunity to vote, to get beyond the Jim Crow days, and to be able to live wherever your finances would allow you to live, to sit in the front of the bus. And so there were many issues plaguing this country at the time that were really heavily based on race. And so there were many African Americans and whites of goodwill, because we couldn't have done it without others of goodwill assisting in that effort to get us to where we are today. My fear is, and I'll be 63 years old in October of this year, my fear is that we're slipping backwards and we're losing many of the gains that individuals during Reverend Steele's time and during that period of American history who were willing to give their lives. They literally gave their lives so that we could live a better life and have opportunities and live that American dream. And unfortunately, there are not many of us that are dedicated to that today. And I fear that we're losing many of the gains that have been achieved. I mean, we see that right here in our own community, where African Americans make up 35% of the population in Leon County, yet we have a majority African American school district. Our schools are becoming more and more segregated because we've got mechanisms in place like charter schools and vouchers and opportunity scholarships where students we as taxpayers are paying for students to attend these segregated schools, for-profit charter schools and private schools, and leaving our traditional public schools handicapped, where 95% of our students will be educated. We're leaving them handicapped because they don't have the resources now that they need, financial resources primarily, in order to be successful. Many of our brighter and more successful students, of course, are leaving the traditional public school system and attending these charter schools. And I believe it was by design. I really do. This is not by happenstance. This started during the Bush administration, the Jeb Bush administration as governor of the state of Florida, when we started along this route of charter schools and vouchers and opportunity scholarships. And we've seen it do nothing but expand exponentially over the last 20 years to the point where we are now, that private schools and charter schools are receiving more taxpayers' dollars, or as many taxpayers' dollars as these as traditional public schools are now. And so that is my fear, because education has always been the great equalizer in this country, and our parents stressed the importance of a quality education. That was the thing that prompted me to run for the Leon County School Board as a single Black male in Tallahassee. I had only been out of college for 4 years when I looked at the condition of public schools in this community and saw that depending on, and then this was before all of the school choice, that depending on where you lived and what school you attended, it determined in a large part the quality of education that you received. And so I decided to run for the school board so that we would have a seat at the table when those kinds of decisions were being made, and was fortunate that we were able to make a lot of really positive changes. But again, I see so many instances where the progress that was made is being eroded over the years. So there are lots of issues that we have made tremendous progress. I cannot say that we haven't. We have made tremendous progress, but if we aren't careful, we will lose many of the gains that we were made in areas like voting rights. I mean, we see what's happening now with felons not being able to vote. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we've got so many people now that are not registering to vote. They're not participating in the election process. And so we don't have people that are being elected that will have our best interest at heart. And so laws are being passed that will erode the gains that have been made. Individuals are being now appointed to courts who are very conservative and are not concerned about seeing to it that everybody has an opportunity to participate in this American dream. They are now making it more difficult, particularly for children of color to attend colleges and universities. It is so expensive to attend colleges and universities in this country now. They're limiting the amount of financial aid that students are eligible for or have access to. The admission scores now on these standardized tests are being raised, and we know who that's going to have a negative impact on in terms of their ability to attend colleges and universities throughout the country. And so these are all issues that are very important to us as a country, and where we're going, African Americans in particular, as a people, based on the sacrifices of those who have come before us. Because I can tell you, I don't know of anybody in this room that would walk out of that door and face a police officer or a sheriff's deputy with a dog scowling at you, or hoses being pointed at you, or your life being threatened. I wouldn't do it, but there were those who were. And so the least that we can do to ensure a future of prosperity for those those generations that are coming behind us. I've got 2 daughters, and I certainly want to make sure that they and that generation have opportunities even greater than the opportunities that I had, because there were those who did that for me, but they were willing to give their lives to make that happen. And so the least that I can do, if I'm not willing to give my life, is to participate in the voting process and run for office and be there where the decisions are being made and policies are being made that impact our day-to-day lives in such a significant way. And every single day, our lives are impacted by decisions that are made by these elected officials at every level of government. We see what's happening in Washington now that is totally dysfunctional, absolutely dysfunctional. When we've got people without access to health insurance and even basic health care in communities throughout this country, but we can't get health care legislation passed in Washington. We had a governor here in the state of Florida that refused, when there were federal dollars available for it, to expand Medicaid, to provide health care, basic health care for those who couldn't afford health insurance. That is unconscionable. And then we allowed him to be elected as our United States Senator. And I'm talking about Rick Scott. I'm talking about Rick Scott. We allowed him to be elected our United States Senator because largely we didn't participate in the elections during that year and ensure that he was not elected, and others like him, because there are so many like him that share that same political ideology and philosophy about where this country is going. We see what's happening in our criminal justice system, where African-American males, young males in particular, are being locked up in jails and prisons, getting a criminal record. And to have a felony record in this country is almost like being the Walking Dead, because you can't get insurance with a felony record. You can't, well, now unless you get your voting right, your rights restored, you can't vote. There are certain places you can't live. There are certain jobs that you can't have. So it's really like the Walking Dead. We almost encourage those people to recidivate, to commit crimes again and go right back into that same system. And so we've got to make sure that we have criminal justice reform in this country, so that so many of our people aren't finding themselves in that cycle of incarceration and what that means for them and their families.
Can you bring out being the Walking Dead and
Yes.
talk about Jeb Bush? Talk about how this relates to what was going on in Gaston County, the caused you to come where you are now in Marion County? In other words, I think you were very concerned about what was going on with the public education system in Gaston County. And Jeb Bush's, hand with charter schools. I think that's what he was concerned about. Can you talk about how critical this is so that you can see your movement from Gaston to Marion County?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what John is referring to is the fact I started my professional career as a school psychologist in the Gaston County School District. And one of the things that I see now, and I spent almost 20 years in that school district during various times, first as a school psychologist, and then I came back as a STEM coordinator for the district. But when I started work in the county, there were 15,000 students in that school district. 15,000. Today, there are 5, because 5,000 students in the Gadsden School District. 95% of those students are African American. About 3% are Hispanic, and another 2% that are white. And students are constantly leaving that school system because they view it as not being a quality school district. But what happens to those kids who don't have the means to leave? We have to ensure that they have a quality education as well. And so that has always been an interest of mine, of course, because my background is in education, is ensuring that every student, regardless of where they live in this country, has an opportunity for a quality public education. And so that really was, again, one of the things that encouraged me to run for the school district, working in a school district like Gadsden, and in living here in Tallahassee and seeing the condition of the schools here in our own community. And this was mid-70s, actually it was a little later than that. I first ran for the school board in 1988. So this was the late 80s, early 90s, not too very long ago. And conditions existed in our public schools right here in Leon County. And so I could go on and on talking about the issues that impact the quality of life of African Americans and people of color in this country that we have got to begin to address, unless there are going to be fewer opportunities available for our children in the near future, for education, for housing. We see housing is so expensive. We see gentrification occurring in communities throughout the state and nation where indigenous residents, because of development, are being forced out of their communities. Smoky Hollow is one clear example right here in Tallahassee. What was a thriving, successful African American community, the only vestiges of that now are some markers that we see downtown. There are examples of that all over. But that's, again, one of the issues that we're having to address. Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Richardson, this is very interesting. I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit.
Sure.
I'm Cecile Schoon. I'm an attorney in Panama City. I do primarily civil rights in the employment side, and I was very much drawn to this whole program. I really appreciate everything you're saying, and your personal experience is really powerful. But you are in a position of authority. You have a team. So I'd like to know what is in place that you're working on that we can support, specifically addressing many of the ills that you have mentioned. Because I feel that that's one of the problems. People don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I would urge you, at this time, it's critical. As you're working on these things, be very plain about it. I mean, of course, you represent everybody, all citizens, regardless of what they look like, their sexual identity, any of that. And I know I've been following you, and I know that's your work and that's what you do. But when you are actually trying to address long-term systemic problems that were started by the government, implemented by the government, and you're targeting certain groups to fix it, I think you need to be real clear about that in your legislation. And you just say, this goes back to the years of mistreatment, lack of tax dollars, segregated schools. Say those words so that the person who's not really listening very well can kind of pick up and go, oh, this is something I need to get involved with. Because I think a lot of times what's happened is so many people they're very complacent. Even those of us who benefited from civil rights, we've been complacent for pretty much a generation. And so we need to activate this very specific language about what's going on in a loving way, but just be clear about it, because I think that's what's missing.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And if you followed my political career, that has been the approach that I've taken. For instance, here in Tallahassee, we see growth and development occurring all over this city, except in traditionally African-American neighborhoods like the South Side of town and Frenchtown. And what my wife and I did as to demonstrate our personal commitment to those communities, we built our home on the South Side of town. We raised our family on the South Side of town. We've been there for 25 years. We encourage others to invest in those communities. But one of, and I run at large. I run as a city commissioner, we run at large, not from an individual district. And so I do represent the entire city. But the point that I make is that if we've invested tax dollars in revitalizing and improving all of these areas of Tallahassee, then it's time now to invest in those neighborhoods, in those communities that have been left behind. We can't call ourselves an all-America city if at the same time we're one of the most economically segregated cities in the state.
So what are you doing? That's my question.
We are pushing development towards the South Side of town and to Frenchtown. But we have to be careful with that, because again, with development and revitalization comes increased property values. And when you increase property values, that increases property taxes. And so those indigenous populations are not able to afford to live in their neighborhood. So we're conscious.
Why don't you propose legislation to grandfather them in? I mean, there's things that can be done, I feel, that can address the reality. I mean, this is my day-to-day job. I mean, the inequities, if they're gender-based, or religion-based, or race-based, when you see the pattern and it's been going on for so long, you kind of have to deliberately talk about, yes, we want to raise the values, but we don't want to push out the people that are.
We talk about that.
Right, so there's whatever mechanisms.
We talk about
give
that.
Give them a credit, do things to help.
But those are not things at our disposal. If you own property and the value of that property goes up, then you pay the taxes on that increased property value. As a city, we can't say, because you live in Frenchtown, if your property values go up, you don't have to pay. We don't have that as our disposal.
On their water bill. I mean, I just think people need to be really creative and address the problem and really get down in the weeds. There are things that people can do or not doing. And I mean, it's warfare out there. The schools, the families, I mean, you just said it. I'm totally outraged by what I see going on. So I feel like those in power, such as yourself, I'd be happy to sit down with you and
I can tell you, Cecile, I have been at this for 20 years. Almost all of my adult life in Tallahassee has been spent representing this community at different levels of government and fighting for African Americans and increased opportunities in our community. So you're preaching to the choir.
Right,
and it ain't been easy, because you don't always have all the help that you need, Reverend Steele. As Reverend Steele can tell you, his dad did not have 100% support from the African American community here in Tallahassee when he was and his family were going through what they were going through. So you're preaching to the choir here. That has been my commitment. Commissioner Williams Cox, same thing. she has dedicated her life, her political life and community involvement to improving conditions in our community. And we do what is available to us to make those conditions better. So, I mean, yeah, like I said, you're preaching to the choir here in terms of the commitment that I have demonstrated. I mean, when I built my home in an area where so many were leaving and wouldn't even consider building now and raise my family there, you don't get too much more committed to that, because I can tell you the value of my home right now, if it was in the north side of town, would be $100,000 more than what it is where I live now. And so that's commitment.
I personally commend you for everything, and nobody can walk in your shoes that you've done, and it's beyond reproach. I'm just saying right now, I feel like, as you stated, with all the things tumbling down and the active efforts to dismantle, I think we need to try new things in addition to everything that you're doing. And I'm just saying.
Well, but it's going to take all of us working together.
Right.
It's not going to be one elected official. It's not going to be government, period.
Right.
It's going to be all of us working together in our respective places. African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, all people of goodwill who want to see conditions better in this country. It's going to take all of us working together and being involved in government in all the ways possible, voting, running for office, supporting candidates to influence policy decisions that are being made. It's going to take all of us to influence that process.
Thank you very much. We have a question here.
Good morning, gentlemen. John Nelson, Jefferson County, right down the road. Just let me share with everybody in here, you think Leon County is in a mess. Jefferson County is in a greater mess.
Yeah, they took your school district.
Yes, and I'm going to talk about that. I've set aside yesterday and today to be in Tallahassee. I told my wife I'm wiping everything off my calendar because I'm one of those diehards. First of all, when you look at Attorney John Dew, that was the person, along with Spivey Gordon and Kent Spriggs, they inspired me when I was small. I used to sit at the back of Memorial Missionary Baptist Church to listen at those rallies and those speeches. And of course, I wear this medallion today because of having been an NAACP president from 86 to 92 that actually achieved success in the county. And of course, I've known Reverend Steele when he first came to Orlando at Mount Zion, because I was living in Mother Eunice Jones' apartment at that time. And of course, Commissioner Richardson and his wife came to Jefferson County on my behalf back then, along with other citizens, to address the education issues.
Yes.
And receive results. Now, I live in a county where, first of all, after retiring from state government after almost 35 years, people asked me to run for office. I was elected to the Board of County Commissioners and became the chair of the board and did great things in changing what I call myself the difference maker. That difference maker caused me to lose my election by 7 votes in 2014 because the community did not understand. The ministerial group didn't understand what battle we had. Now, when you look at the deterioration of the county, back in 1948, we were 1980, let's see, I'm trying to think of you, we were 48% of the population. Today, we are almost less than 31%.
Yes.
And so, why did the education system fold? Because superintendents were elected that did not meet the quality of education to lead, and therefore the Department of Education said, you guys had 15 years of failed school systems. No, we had 15 years of failed educational leaders.
Right.
That's the testimony I put before the school board when they were talking about making Jefferson the only county in the state of Florida a charter school complete.
Yeah.
There's no public schools in Jefferson County. So I'm here today at 71 years old looking for ways that I can continue to be a difference maker. And I'm one of those, I'm not afraid, because I've lived that life as an NAACP president, going against Ted Turner and all kind of people to be a difference maker. And I spend most of my time, I think I got to bed about 3 o'clock this morning, because I talked with the president of Concerned United People. We have to find a solution. How do we bring the religious leaders together?
Right.
How we get our community back, because as I told them, information I received from Dr. Ortiz, when they were talking about going to charter school, it does not work for black and brown students.
No.
And so here we are now, with a population where when our kids graduate, they are leaving, they won't be there for another 40 or 50 years,
Right.
if they come back. So I'm here to try to look at ways that I can continue along with others to be difference makers. And by the way, we're also losing our land.
Yes.
We're going to be meeting on June the 3rd to figure out how we can form an LLC to get all of this property that we have over there. I just met a guy with 100 and some acres and say, hey man, how do we keep our land? So I just want to say everything that the both of you already said today is a reality in rural counties. There are 40 rural counties in the state of Florida. And so my job, with whatever years I have left in life, is to be that difference maker in Jefferson, and hopefully that will kind of spread back to the urban counties as well as those 40 rural counties.
Sure.
So I just want to make that statement.
Thank you, John.
Well, Commissioner Richardson has certainly brought us to embracing the future and giving an assessment of now. And I think it's just wonderful that you got the commissioner to come for this particular session, because he's so much more articulate with the present and future than probably I am or would be. I see Gloria Anderson is waiting with the mic. Now this probably will be explosive.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Gloria.
You gotta have to hold it close to your mouth.
Okay, good morning.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Gloria Jefferson Anderson. I was born and raised here in Leon County. I have worked with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Missouri Council for over 50 years. I came in as a teenager, and then I married into a family, the Kirchhoff family, who originally, John, is from Jefferson County. And I have been at the table with them. I was a young girl, and I didn't know a lot, but I remember the movements here in Tallahassee. And one of the things that thrilled me the most was the women.
Oh, of course.
I wanted to say something when Henry was speaking, but he was good. But anyway, in being around the movement, I admired the women, the wives of Dr. King, the wife of Dr. King, the wife of Ralph Abernathy, the wife of Mrs. Reverend Steele, Ms. Rosa Parks, Ms. Evelyn Lowry. Those women really were the backbone behind the men. And each one has a story to tell. And when you meet them, and I've talked with them, it's like we sitting here today. I've been in many at the conferences, many meetings with them. And the way they carried themselves, they were so meek and humble, and there was not a bit of anger in them. Now, I was a little young, I was a hothead. So after being around them, I learned how to conduct myself in their honor, because they were so smooth, they were so, but they made a point. And I just wanted to add that I just want to say that first, but we do have, I'm from the country, John. I'm not from the city, I'm a country girl, okay? So, and I do study history. I don't see why, if Gadsden, Leon, and Jefferson counties are having these same kinds of problems, why not create a North Florida coalition of communities?
That's in the world.
Leon County comes out of Gadsden County, Jefferson County comes out of Gadsden County, so Gadsden County has been the leader. And in that way, we can create more, if we work together on the same kinds of problems, and that's all over. The land issue, Leon County, they're losing their land too here. Blacks are losing land. It ain't just Frenchtown and this Bond community, South Side. It's in my neighborhood. I grew up in a neighborhood with about 19 black farm families. And a few years ago, about 10 years ago, a developer brought up vacant land in my community, right at my father's estate door. And now we are Evening Rose. Well, no, I asked the developer, I said, now we are Edgewood community. Are you all Evening Rose at Edgewood? Or Edgewood at Evening Rose? He never answered that. But that's happening all over. It ain't just in town, it's everywhere. The little land that's left, they are buying it up. They're buying it up. I think on Centerville Road, the St. Peter community where I attended church, all that land is practically gone. So we do have life issues. Because Leon County was rural too. The only thing long years ago in Tallahassee was Monroe Street. That was a city. But everything else was rural. There were over 9,000 black slaves in Leon County and about 2,000 white. So what I'm saying is the numbers have changed now, but with that information, and I do believe in history, if people understood where they came from, then they could understand, they could sort of get some direction as to how they can move forward. You talked about the ministers. We have too many ministers that's brought into your communities that don't know anything about your community.
Correct.
First thing they do, the first thing the churches need to do is educate these preachers on what the history of this community, going back to when it first got started in 1822 or whatever it was. They need to understand the history before they can move forward. Because it looks good now, but it wasn't always good. And we have to understand that. Now, I have so much to say, but
let me ask if anyone else, because we're already into lunchtime.
Here's something else.
Okay.
Now, we have had 3 to 4 movements here in Tallahassee. When I leave town, I have to go in other communities like Montgomery, Birmingham, to see Tallahassee's history. And I'm not saying that, but isn't it time for the city, for Leon, maybe Jefferson and Gadsden to come together with a civil rights museum? You know what? You know what happened just the other day on Facebook? I saw where they have created something called a Florida Civil Rights Trail.
Yeah.
Tallahassee had all these movements and they ain't even on the list. And so I did respond, and I outlined to the group the movements that were right here in Tallahassee. And not only that, and they thanked me, but I don't know where it's gonna get. Because all of this is history. We can't let this die. We can't let this die. I spoke to 300 kids back in February at Kate Sullivan Elementary School, and I gotta say this, and 4th and 5th graders. And they were so excited. And I told them, I said, do you all know that we had a little river bridges right here in Tallahassee? I asked them, I said, have y'all read the story, River Bridges? All them L-L-N. I said, do you know we had little river bridges right here in Tallahassee? They couldn't believe it. And I said, you know what the name of the school was? And somebody said, Kate Sullivan. I said, yes, Kate Sullivan. I said, it was a young lady, her name was Janice Melody Thompson. I said, she was the first little black girl. I'm talking to 300 students now, and they looking at me like this because they couldn't believe it. They didn't know. I said, she was the first little black girl to integrate Leon County school system here at Kate Sullivan. And they couldn't believe me. And I said, let me tell you her story. I said, no, she was not like Ruby Bridges, who had the officers walking her to school. Her big brother, her mother had parked 2 blocks down the street. And her big brother, who was a senior in high school, walked her up to Kate Sullivan.
Yeah, Gloria, we are very interested, but
anyway,
they're wanting to move on with the program. Thank you, Gloria. And thank you all for being here and for being a part of today's activities.
Let's give our panel a round of applause.
Wonderful job. Thanks, you teed it up.
You say the day.